Thank you everybody for coming today to our third Locus Awards reading. And I'm going to start with Darcie. Darcie Little Badger is a Lapon writer with a PhD in oceanography. Her critically acclaimed debut novel, Latsue, was featured in Time magazine as one of the best 100 fantasy books of all time. Latsue was also won the Locus Award for Best First Novel and is a Nebula, Ignite, and Lodestar finalist. Her second fantasy novel, A Snake Falls to Earth, received a Nebula Award, an Ignite Award, a Newbery Honor, and is on the National Book Awards long list. Her third book, Shayna Lende, is the prequel to Latsue and was published this spring. Please join me in welcoming Darcie Little Badger.
Hello. Should I just get started? All right. Make sure. Stay. Oh, first of all, I want to thank everyone for nominating my short story, Those Hitchhiking Kids, for Locus. That was completely just a wonderful moment, just because I had such fun writing this story. And I'm gonna read from it today. Hopefully I'll finish it, but if not, it is available on the Sunday Morning Transport for free online. So all right, Those Hitchhiking Kids. And Julian and Fran, the editors, have this little question before we start the story. What does wanderlust mean when you're a ghost? Find out by joining Darcie Little Badger's wonderfully intrepid Corey and Jimena on the road. All right, Those Hitchhiking Kids. They hadn't died while hitchhiking, and ghosts couldn't own a car, but Corey and Jimena shared the condition of wanderlust, so something had to be done. In high school, they ditched class to bus hop through Houston, losing themselves in mazes of hot streets. Death hadn't extinguished the urge to travel without aim, although it made the process trickier, more frustrating. A red truck sped past Jimena, who lowered her thumb in momentary defeat. She'd glimpsed the driver through his dusty, bug-greased window. A middle-aged man, his baseball cap drawn low over deep-set eyes. There'd been a pine-shaped air freshener hanging in his rearview mirror. Based on those observations alone, she couldn't decide whether he'd opted to ignore her or simply couldn't see her. Over the past 50 years, hitchhiking had become increasingly difficult for Corey and Jimena, their success rate dropping from now and then to almost never. And although Corey often reassured her that times change, people are just more cautious, Jimena was afraid that they were fading like old paint in the sun, that someday no human on Earth would be able to see them. And then what? Only 6 cars in 1 hour, Corey said. The highway's a dud. Let's try another one, she joked. Around them, the Chihuahuan desert exhaled mirages, air rippling over the yellow-red earth. They were trudging to the end of Route 67, which ran from the tip of Illinois to the edge of southwest Texas. Take pity on us, Corey groaned at the sky, and then he flopped onto his back, his limbs spread starfish style. It's sweltering. There's no rush. Jimena sat cross-legged behind his head, her body casting a shadow across his youthful face. Visually, they hadn't changed in over 50 years. Corey still had a couple blemishes on his left cheek, one on his broad nose, and the shadow of facial hair down his jawline and chin. Jimena's oval face lacked wrinkles, and her smile sparkled with the bulky silver braces she'd worn 3 years, from sophomore to senior year. She'd worked 3 years to afford. A shame. She could have spent the money on concert tickets and milkshakes, but they died young and fast and hadn't seen it coming. To pass the time, Jimena wove tiny braids into Corey's dense black hair, braiding, unbraiding, rebraiding. He dozed. She hummed aimlessly. Her shadow lengthened from his neck to his chest before the sun ducked behind the distant mountains. I think we're near Marfa, she said. Walking distance, maybe. That old army town? He drowsily asked. Been there and done that. Joseph said, Joseph? The last trucker who picked us up. Oh, yeah. He said Marfa's full of artists now. Corey laughed. No way. How can we see everything if everything keeps changing? We don't change. That's so. He sat up behind Jimena and rested head on her bare shoulder. She wore a sleeveless sundress, white daisies on yellow, a very flattering print, one of her finest outfits, the dress she died in. What dress had she been buried in? Probably that austere long-sleeved navy blue smock she'd always worn to communion. Am I getting old and boring? Corey wondered aloud. He wore a white shirt and denim jeans, his go-to date night outfit. Never boring, she reassured him. After the accident, they didn't get hungry or thirsty, didn't burn in the sun, and never got bored. They slept, they dreamed, and if they weren't careful, they dreamed forever, which was why Jimena and Corey always napped in shifts. There'd be time for rest eventually, but they wanted to witness Earth's finale. Corey thought humans and their nukes would be the death of her, but Jimena was convinced that the human species would go the way of the dinosaurs before their planet disintegrated in the heat of a luminously aging sun. A red convertible, top down, went cruising past. Even though Jimena and Corey were sitting idly, the car slowed and then stopped on the shoulder of Route 67. From the driver's seat, a woman shouted, "Are you kids all right?" The hitchhikers jumped to their feet. "We need a ride," Jimena called back. She always made first contact with drivers, although Corey was chattier on the road. "Where to?" asked the woman. "Marfa." The driver waved them over. "That's where I'm headed." Their new friend, Wendy with an I, was a sculptor of clay molds for bronze casts. 48 years old and recently divorced, she'd been driving for 3 days. She wore a driving scarf, yellow silk, tied under her chin a la Aubrey Hepburn, and smoked an e-cigarette, exhaling the scent of stale mint. "What kind of statues do you make?" Jimena asked. She sat in the passenger seat while Corey manned the back. He had to lean forward to hear the ladies over the steady rush of air, which was cooling quickly. "Figurative," Wendy said. "Human busts." Corey's immature snicker was lost in the wind, although Jimena instinctually knew that he'd laughed at the word bust and always did, so she rolled her eyes. "Don't roll your eyes at me," he whispered in her ear. Could he see a reflection in the rearview mirror, or were they both just predictable? "I've always felt like a bird in a cage," Wendy continued. "Well fed and protected, but restrained. My career has been defined by safe art because safe pays the bills if you're lucky, and I've been lucky, but..." She trailed off, distracted by a sign along the highway. "Marfa's Mystery Lights, viewing area 1 mile. "Mystery Lights?" Wendy asked. "Is that for real?" "Yep," shouted Corey. "Marfa's Mystery Lights. Some people claim they're aliens." "Or experimental military aircraft," Jimena added. "Or Apache ghosts." "What do they look like?" Wendy asked. "Typical UFOs, I guess," Corey supposed with a shrug. "We've never seen them." "Hey, what's the time? I feel weird." Out of unchangeable habit, Jimena glanced at her wristwatch, which was frozen at 10:13. Then she checked the dash. Only 9:45. But that couldn't be right. Suddenly, her skin was feverishly warm, which normally meant, "My clock's slow," Wendy said. Corey and Jimena locked eyes in the rearview mirror. He winked and she winced. At first, Corey's gaze was clear and bright, with irises like rich oak polished to his shine. Then capillaries burst and blood flooded his left sclera. When Jimena looked down, there was a hole in her sundress and the pretty daisies were as red as roses. "Oops," Corey said. At least Wendy didn't crash in shock. She just screamed and stomped the brakes and reached for Jimena and then screamed some more when her gloved hand passed through air because the passenger seat was empty and had always been. 500 miles away, the hitchhikers materialized alongside a random forested stretch of Route 67. Green pines swayed in a heavy wind, their pointed canopies bumping together like hands in prayer. "I wish my watch worked," Jimena said. "Poor Wendy." They'd been in Beau's car for 3 hours when Corey noticed the sign, "Marfa's Mystery Lights, viewing area and EV charging port, 1 mile. "Hey, look," he exclaimed, pointing. "Remember those, Jay?" "Have you seen them?" Beau asked. He was a sturdy, bearded man in a baseball cap and windbreaker. His eyes were a shade of green that came from contact lenses, not nature. They'd met Beau near a charging station along 67. He'd been reluctant to take two people, said it was dangerous, said he'd be outnumbered, said you couldn't trust strangers, much less hitchhiking strangers. Haven't you heard the horror stories? The highways are lined with killers and robbers, all looking for a sentimental mark. But after Corey and Jimena turned their pockets inside out to prove that they were empty, Bo had agreed to take them near the border. Don't try anything funny, he'd warned. My car's a driver defense model. Jimena had nodded solemnly, pretending that she knew what that meant, that she'd been born in an era of intelligent electric cars and hadn't died before the first seatbelt law. The sign seemed to animate Bo, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel, his question loud and eager. We rarely visit Marfa, Corey explained, so no. Keep your eyes peeled. The car's domed roof was as clear as glass, a convertible without the rush of sweet desert air. Through the dome, Jimena could see the Milky Way, the waning moon, Venus and Mars, and a dozen restless pinpricks of light that she'd recently learned were satellites, not falling stars. An important distinction, you could practically set your watch by the predictable movements of satellites. To Jimena, who had a broken spectral timepiece, that was more useful than unfulfilled wishes. What time is it? Jimena asked, sitting up. She'd been lying unbuckled across the back seat to stargaze. 9:23, Bo answered. Why are you in a hurry? We need to reach town before 10. No problem. Bo took a slow right turn, leaving the highway for an unmarked dirt road, little more than 2 ruts cutting through the Chihuahuan desert. In the front passenger seat, Corey was uncharacteristically silent, so Jimena raised the obvious. This isn't the right way. Don't you want to see Marfa's lights? Yeah. You won't find them in an approved viewing zone. Real locals know better places. I thought you were from Fresno. Not originally, Bo said. I lived here as a boy. It's close. Just 5 more minutes. Bo pressed a star-shaped icon on the touchscreen dash, and the overhead dome went black. Maybe it'd always been a video screen, nothing but a facsimile of the sky. In the soft moonlight, the desert, through the side window, resembled impressionist art, layered shadows creating suggestions of rocks and squat cacti. With very little effort, Jimena could imagine they were hitchhiking on an alien planet. Humans had walked on the moon and steered manned spacecraft around Mars. Someday there might be roads on the moons of Jupiter, rides to different solar systems, thousands of ghosts born in the void. Humanity was capable of such wonders. Soon the car stopped and went dark except for a single light over the rearview mirror. When Jimena winkled the latch on her door, nothing happened, but that didn't surprise her. They'd been hitchhiking for 40,000 days, more probably. She'd lost count. Attempted robberies happened, and worse. Bo knew they possessed nothing but the clothes on their backs. She sought Corey's eyes in the rearview mirror. He nodded subtly. And then he scooted behind the driver's side seat and leaned forward, pressing her forehead against its faux leather upholstery, waiting for a sign. Corey's fingers tensed in a fist. It would be easy for Jimena to wrap her long arms around Bo in a tightening squeeze. He'd claw at her cold skin and she'd feel nothing. Sorry about that, Bo said. Child locks. He pressed a button and every door popped open. You have a family? Corey asked, visibly relaxing. 3 sons. They're grown now, but old habits die hard. As one, they all stepped outside. Well, damn, Bo grunted, hands on his hips, staring at the southern horizon. I wasted your time. Doubt we'll see anything over that. Used to be dark. The horizon was aglow with Marfa's electric lights, so bright they diluted half the Milky Way. Been a while since you last visited? Corey asked. 41 years. Mister, the world's changing. He snickered giddily and pulled Jimena into a half hug. Ah, thank God, she sighed, letting Corey spin her. What's tickled you? Bo asked. Is development a punchline now? We're just relieved. You had a worried a moment, Corey laughed, driving to the middle of nowhere, child locks deployed. Thought I'd kill you? Bo asked, snorting in disbelief, as if they just claimed that 1 + 1 = 5 instead of stranger equals danger. No, Jimena giggled. Thought we'd have to kill you. Huh? Out of self-defense, Corey reassured him. Well, defense of others. It was easy to phase through a car's aluminum shell, and they couldn't die twice anyway. However, they kill and had killed to protect living hitchhikers. It wasn't fun, but it didn't give them nightmares either. The ghosts they made, on the other hand, the nightmares always claimed them quickly. Hilarious, Bo snapped while backing away from the cackling kids. You freaks can walk in here. Town's lit up like the Vegas Strip, so you can't miss it. And after he zipped away, Jimena and Corey danced in the desert until 10:13, and then they danced along the moonlit cornfields of Iowa. And I'm going to stop there. There's like one more section when they're in the distant future, but that's it for now. Thank you.
Excellent.
Way.
Thank you so much.
Yay.
That was great.
Thank
Okay, and we'll do Q&A at on the other end of the next reading. Okay, I'm gonna line up all my tabs here. Okay.
people know in chat that they can ask questions.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, people can ask questions. You can throw questions in a Q&A anytime you want, and when we get to the end, we will address all the questions if there are any. But we'll move on to Tobi right now. Tobi Ogundiran is the award-winning author of the critically acclaimed Jackal, a Publisher's Weekly Top 10 Summer Read. Woo! Nice. Which has been described as grim by way of Amos Tutuola. Stephen King meets Cyprian Equincy. He has been nominated for the Shirley Jackson, Locus, British Science Fiction Association, and Novel Awards. His short fiction has been collected in several years' best anthologies and also featured on the hit podcast LeVar Burton Reads. His most recent work is In the Shadow of the Fall, a novella about Yoruba gods and the beings that hunt them. Please welcome Tobi Ogundiran.
Thank you. I'm excited. Thank you all for having me. Thank you to everyone who voted for my collection, Jacko, which is up for the Locus Award for Best Collection. And I'm going to be reading a story titled Midnight in Moscow, which is about a man called Midnight who's in Moscow. It's about a Nigerian man who is a fugitive and he's fleeing his past, and the demons that haunt him, and he has found refuge, so to speak, in Soviet era Moscow. And he's in a dark and dank and really cold apartment, and basically we follow, what happens to him when he arrives there. This is a story about stories, and I know that sounds cliche, but because everyone's always like, yeah, I write stories about stories, but no, this is a story about stories. So Midnight in Moscow. I woke up freezing. I had fallen asleep, fully dressed, exhausted from my travels, and yet I felt as though I were standing naked outside. Bed springs groaned in protest as I struggled into a sitting position. The windows were frosted, save for a rough circle at the center, which afforded me a view of the white world beyond. Snow was falling, melting everything in a layer of white. The lightless buildings and leafless trees, the empty cars and empty swings, everything was eerily still, like a life-scale diorama of a winter night. I watched a snowflake tumble through the air, a perfect glittering hexagon, and land on my windowsill in the mound of old snow. I missed Nigeria severely in that moment. I missed the heat and the sun, the cool trickle of sweet watermelon down my throat, the familiar press of black bodies. How people could survive such cold was beyond me. I wanted to leave already, leave and return home, but I could not return. I could never return, not after what I'd done. And the thought that I would continue to live like this, forever hiding, forever a stranger in a foreign land. My eyes drifted to my backpack, and the promise of it held a swift exit. But no, there would be no swift end for me. I deserved to suffer. Taking off both gloves, I touched my hands to the cast iron radiator, feeling the vestiges of rapidly vanishing warmth. Or perhaps I had imagined it and it hadn't really been warm to begin with. Either way, power had gone out long ago. I stood there for a moment, my breath misting before me, contemplating my next step. Everything was freezing. Even my balls had retracted into my body. I couldn't remain like this. I had to get warm. Teeth chattering, I began to rifle through the apartment, pulling open wardrobes and drawers, searching for something, anything to keep me warm. I cried out with joy when I found some old candles nesting beneath the kitchen sink, but my joy was premature and short-lived, as I soon realized there were no matches to light them. Moments later, I was knocking on the door of room 908, hoping my neighbors were not already asleep. The door swung open, and a bear of a man filled the doorway. Barrel-chested and extremely hairy, he had hands that looked like they could easily crack open my head. Mine Holodna, I croaked, the foreign words grating my throat. He glowered down at me for a few moments, and I got the idea he didn't understand a word I said. So I rubbed my arms, miming code. Davai, davai, he boomed, waving me inside. My first impression of the room beyond was that it was homely, cramped in a way that felt lived in, as though it had known bodies for a long time. The perfect antithesis to the cold, hollow mausoleum of my apartment. A merry log fire roared in the oven, and I shuddered with relief as its warmth washed over me. Three knitting women were arranged about the dinner table, wearing purple sarafans, their hair collected into identical pigtails. They looked like three generations of women: daughter, mother, grandmother. They also looked like they might have been the same woman, captured in different stages of her life. They all turned to stare at me. Hello, I stuttered. I'm your neighbor. I pointed in the general direction of room 909. Sacied. Within moments, I was offered a place at the table and a mug of kvass thrust into my hand and was working my way through a bowl of soup and a loaf of black bread. So, said the grizzled man, watching me eat, what they call you? Midnight, I said, between mouthfuls, because I was born at night. He broke into a wide smile, showing huge yellow teeth and one gold incisor glinting in the firelight. Midnight, he roared, nodding like I'd said something particularly astute. His good name. Things happen at midnight, sometimes good, sometimes bad. He pointed at himself. Medved. Then at the three women from the oldest to the youngest. Tatiana, Tanya, Tanushka. Nice to meet you, I said. They all stared at me, unblinking for several long seconds, then returned to their knitting. We lapsed into companionable silence as I finished my food. The three women kept knitting, and I wanted to ask if it was a quilt or a blanket or something else. It looked alternatively like a quilt, then a blanket, then a patch of star-spangled sky at night. But I decided not to. Tanya stood up abruptly from the table to feed more fire into the oven. Thank you for having me, I said, and for feeding me. I really didn't mean to intrude. Nonsense, Midvid pronounced. We are happy to have you. We rarely have visitors, he considered. No, we never have visitors. Has been a long time since we have Midvid, said Tatiana, and the word came out as a warning. What? Said Midvid. Can't I talk? You talk too much. I talk too? He broke off, mouthing wordlessly. Turning to me, do you have any idea what it's like to live with these three midnights? No, you don't, but I will tell you. Leave the poor boy alone, said Tanya. Why? He's not complaining. Are you complaining, Midnight? I see, not complaining. And he clapped me on the back with a huge hand, with a hand so huge I nearly face planted into my bowl of soup. I watched them bicker and realized suddenly that I understood them. I couldn't tell if they were speaking Russian or English, or if indeed they were speaking at all, but I understood them. The room swam, or perhaps it was my head that swam, and I felt pleasurably warm. No longer were the walls brick, but mud. No longer was the roof yellowed, waterlogged concrete, but made of thatch, with naked blackened rafters running beneath. Rafters I knew had been there a long time, perhaps even longer than I imagined. Medved seemed to have grown hairier, bigger, his face pulled into a long, glistening snout. The three women looked even more identical, their skin almost porcelain white in the firelight, with bursts of rouge on their cheeks. Do you like stories? Medved was saying. What? I asked. Stories. You like them? I think so. Nana used to tell me stories as a boy until father forbade her. Told her it filled my head with unreal things, made me weak. I thought of Nana, the only light in my childhood, and what it would do to her when she discovered what I had done. I, Medved uttered his disapproval. Only the small-minded will think that. Stories are a good thing. They are how ideas are born. People have always told stories, maybe to make sense of the world or to make sense of themselves, maybe to pass a message. But stories we tell ourselves are what's important because a story makes the person. So I will tell you a story. Listen, a long time ago, long before the Mongols, when Moscow was nothing but a dream, terrible winters plagued the land. And he pointed at the window through which I could see swirling snow hole. You think this is winter? It's sunshine, spring even compared to the winters of olden days. Now, those winters lasted long, and the sun did not show her face, and the people starved. Every winter, many died, and the old men and the old women would sit and think, I am old and have lived a long, full life. Why eat food that the young can eat, or burn wood that can keep them warm? So they began to go into the forest, these old people, saying they are going to visit Baba Yaga. Now, this was just a tale, a metaphor for death, for sacrificing oneself for the young ones to survive. But remember, I said stories, when repeated, become real. Let me tell you, midnight, Baba Yaga became real. A real Vedma who lived in the darkest places of the forest, where the sun never shines. And in her hut, she received these old folk and killed them and ate them. Drink your quest, midnight. I drank my quest, enraptured by Medved's tale. Medved nodded his contentment and continued. So it went on winter after winter, old folk finding their way into Baba Yaga's cookpot, until the Vedma developed a taste for human flesh and came to expect them. But it happened one day, a young girl went after her beloved babushka into the forest, and soon came upon Baba Yaga's hut. Baba Yaga cooked her, and the Vedma found that she enjoyed the girl more. She had been feeding on the old and wrinkly, but the meat of the young was juicier, the bones softer and richer, and she realized she did not want old people no more. So she began to fly in her mortar into the village to steal children. The people were distraught, rightly so. They could not protect their children from the evil Vedma, so they began to tell themselves a story of a bear who was immune to Baba Yaga's magic and the only one who could protect them from her. When the next winter came around, like clockwork, Baba Yaga came flying to the village looking for children. Then a great grizzly came and closed his jaws around her neck and dragged her into the woods. He killed her? I asked. Medved shook his head. Stories are hard to kill. Baba Yaga remains in the minds of the people, and so she keeps on living. Nothing is ever truly dead until no one speaks of it no more. So, in winter, she haunts these lands in search of human flesh, and the bear protects the people. I sat there, nursing my drink, thinking of stories. If I could rewrite my past with a story, if I could simply turn back the clock, I would. But for all of Medved's belief that stories create things, it simply wasn't the case. Life did not work that way. My eyes fell on the three women knitting away in perfect synchrony. They had remained silent all through, focused on their task, and it, whatever it was they were knitting, seemed to be almost complete. I could not ignore the urge to ask any longer. What are you making? I asked finally. The youngest of the women, Tanyushka, looked at me with dull eyes. A trap, she said. We're making a trap. Now, I'll stop here.
Awesome. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. I noticed that, like, I think I read, Toby, that you said once that you didn't write about Nigeria until you left Nigeria, and then you moved to Russia.
And then, yeah,
I didn't write about Russia until I left Russia.
that is correct.
That's
Yeah.
so now you're in
I'm
Mississippi.
yeah, Mississippi. Yes.
So that's up next.
Yeah, who knows?
Right.
I got lots of stories about Mississippi. Yeah.
You do already?
Yeah.
Excellent. That's very cool. Do you feel like you get to like absorb the folklore of every place that you go to and
Pretty much, pretty much. Yeah, I think there's something to be said for just, living and experiencing and absorbing soaking up the atmosphere of a place. And for me, at least, it really isn't until I leave a place that I really start to think about the place and I guess write stories about that place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And then, will you tell me again? I'm sorry, Darcie. What did you read? You were reading from.
It's those books.
Hitchhiking.
Yes, it's from those hitchhiking kids from
Yeah.
the Sunday morning transport.
Nice. That's a very cool platform.
Thank you.
think
Yeah,
that-
I've really loved what they've done in just like a short time.
It's a
Fran
really
and
clean
Julian.
format.
Yes.
It works really well. It works really well. No, I
I'm
really
excited. Every week we get emails about new stories. I'm like, ooh, it's time to read.
I know, right? That's very good. That's very good. So did you wrote, so Elatwe and then Shayna Linda, is there another book in that
Oh, in the series?
world? I mean, that was second one was a prequel.
Yeah, it might be nice to wrap it up with a third book that returns to, so the first book takes place in 2020 when it was published. And the second book takes place in the 1970s. It tells the story of Ellie from Elatsoe's grandma when she was a teenager. So I was like, what if I returned? I can either do a third book where it tells like 3 different stories, Ellie, her grandma, and their heroic ancestor in their time periods. Or I could just tell a story that takes place in the 2020s with Ellie and her grandma as a grandma. So I haven't decided yet, but I think it'd be good to wrap it up with a third book.
Yeah.
It's not what I'm working on now. I'm doing something else in terms of a young adult book. And I'm also doing a middle grade book for the series Cabin 23, which is essentially like, it's got Goosebump vibes, but a different author writes the story writes the scary story every book. And it's kind of sandwiched within this camp of kids telling these stories. So it's the
that's
same
cool.
universe. Yeah.
I have not heard of that. Are you doing
yeah.
anything with Marvel anymore?
Let me think. No, I'm doing something now with Boom. But
cool.
so the young adult thing I'm working on it's like a fusion of mostly a book, but also it has like a short comic in the beginning and a short comic in the end. And I was like, I'd like to dip my toes into graphic novels eventually. So that's like a little kiddie pool version of that. So
And
yeah.
Boom Studios is kind of fun, I think.
Yeah.
The people that I know that worked with them had things can be rocky with any
house.
And with any house of any kind, things can be rocky.
That's the thing. So I work with the Jim Henson side of it. But yeah, I've had one of my friends, I won't say his name, but he's an artist. And yeah, for sure. It's one reason I like graphic novels in general, just because I feel like the creators, they keep more of the rights. We can really advocate for higher pay, especially for artists. That I'm not seeing as much within the big comic publisher world, but I think of course there's people who are working towards that there too. So it's like, but yeah, definitely advocate for your rights, because get someone to read that contract, like your agent. Hopefully you have one if you're doing that. Yeah.
And then, so Tobi, you have, is it book 1? In the shadow, is it In the Shadow of the
Yeah, In the Shadow of the
novella one, of like a short
novella
one,
basically,
of a duology, and that's coming out soon, right?
That is coming out soon, next month, actually, July 2023, and I'm really excited. Yeah.
That is exciting. Tell people what it's about a little bit.
So it's about this is always really tough. It's about an acolyte who she's been training to become a priest of the Orisha, who are like the Yoruba gods and the Yoruba pantheon. And for years, really, what happens typically is a god chooses you and bestows a favor upon you, and then you become the priest of that god. But she, for some reason, has been overlooked, has never been able to hear the gods. All her peers and even her juniors have graduated, and she's like, what's up? What's happening? So she decides to take her matter into her own hands and build an Idan, which is like an effigy, a small statuette in which you can trap the soul of a god basically bind them to your will. She just wants to ask questions like, why haven't you guys chosen me? And as she does the ritual, it goes all right. Instead, she gets a vision of something really, really bad and inadvertently alerts an enemy sect who, I don't know, it turns out that they have been hunting these gods. And she sort of finds herself in the midst of this centuries old war between gods and god killers. And yeah, that's how it kicks off.
Is the second one coming out quickly after it, or is it next year, or is
Yeah.
it?
The second one will be out really quickly in terms of publishing. January next year. It's all done, copy edited. I think the cover reveal actually happened yesterday on all the socials. Yeah, that is called At the Fountains of Creation. So 2 books in the duology done. Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you.
close
Yeah.
to a novel, which I think was what you sort of started aiming at, and then
Yeah.
swept
Yeah.
in short story land, which is not a
Exactly.
terrible place to be, but you know.
It is not. Yeah, I cut my teeth in short stories, and I have no regrets. Actually, yeah, it's been a fun ride.
That's cool. Well, so
Mhm.
Darcie, sorry, I think I cut you off a little bit. You have
Oh.
Cabin 23.
Oh.
What is that what you're working on right now?
I'm working on that and my next young adult book for Living Credo, which is that kind of like mostly written, but with like 15 pages of comic in the beginning, 15 at the age, and illustrations in between.
Nice.
So I do have an artist who's tentatively signed on for that project, but I'm also working on an adult book. So my agent was like, when he learned that I was working on 3 things, he was like, do 2. So like focusing on the contracted one and the young adult one. And then I can like, the adult book is going to take a while. I'm waiting for some developments to happen this year so I can incorporate them into the book. So we'll see.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Do you have a title for the adult book, or any
Not yet.
any little trinkets of information you want to?
I think like the young adult book, like that I'm working on for Living Credo, originally I just like pitched it as like cousins, but I think Children of Owl might be something. Because it does deal with I wrote a short story in Strange Horizons forever ago. That's about my pug is pawing at my anyway. What do you want, ma'am?
Does he need to come up?
You want to come up? You gotta jump. I'm not gonna pick
Wants
you
a
up. Okay.
feature.
Okay, Peach. Yeah, it's like off screen. But yeah, I wrote a story for Strange Horizons called Owl versus the Neighborhood Watch about this professor who sees Owl harbinger of doom and is just like convinced that she can stop the bad thing that he foretells from happening. So I love that conceit, and I was like, what if this was what this teenager was trying to do? And it kind of deals with her own sense of loss, and what happens when you live a life where a lot of bad things happen. Do you give up hope? Do you keep fighting? So it's like I kind of want to do that. I'm gonna pick up my pug.
The pug wins.
Come on, man.
Well, yeah,
Get
We
up
want
here.
to see the pug anyway.
really do
So
want,
the
at this point,
pug.
we have to see the pug. I did see a pug tail go by at one point before.
Oh my
But we
goodness,
were
Miss
starting.
Pug. Miss Pug. Hello. What do you want,
Oh,
ma'am?
oh,
Let's say
see?
hi. Say hi.
that was why we needed him to come up here.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, did you two have any questions for each other as we go?
Yeah.
Or shall we wrap this evening up and everyone can go celebrate Juneteenth?
I am curious though. So you released this collection. I was like, what went into, from an author's side?
Yeah.
What went into just like curating these stories and just everything?
Well,
Tell me everything.
for me, there's no the really wasn't any science behind it. I simply compiled all the stories I had published from like 2018 until 2022. Yeah, I was like, all right, this is a collection. I think this is a good enough number of stories for a collection. Let's try to get it published. And yeah, it got picked up by Undertow Publications. And initially my editor was like, he thinks he's going to cut 1 or 2 stories out of it, but he left all the stories. And I wrote
Nice.
2 additional stories. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. It was really good. Yeah.
Oh, so everything got left in.
Everything got left in. Yeah.
Oh, it didn't
Yeah.
have to be like kill one of your darlings or anything like that.
No, oh, you kill my babies. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's really good.
Well, that's great, and it's done really well. I know our reviewers liked it, and I think it's gotten a good reception. So that's fun.
Yeah, I'm really excited with the reception. Yeah, it's been more than I expected, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for coming and reading. It's been like such a great evening of readings. You were our third set, and then we get to like wrap up for the evening and move on to the next thing. I hope you can come to some of the other readings we'll have tomorrow night and Friday night, and we'll have the award ceremony on YouTube. So I hope you see that.
Okay.
And I'm sorry that you couldn't make it, but congratulations on being in the list. And
Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
it's been so great to at least get you involved in this part. And I hope you have a great night. So thank you so much.